Our family's gathering is important. If you don't come back, I'll force you to get a divorce.
At my late dad's funeral, Sarah's sudden outburst left me frozen in place. I couldn't understand her nerve to continue spouting nonsensical words. I had reached my limit. Just as my anger was about to erupt, someone appeared behind me and delivered a shocking statement to Sarah. My name is Rachel, and I'm a 40-year-old handmade artist. I've been married to my husband, Paul, for 20 years now. Paul runs his restaurant. The whole family is a business person. His dad, John, owns a construction company, and his older sister, Mary, runs a nail salon. His younger sister, Emily, is a lawyer and is about to open her own office. I've had intense conflicts with his mom, Sarah, even before we got married. My dad, Robert, and John have been best friends since their childhood. Because of that, Paul and I often visited each other's homes and grew up feeling like siblings until high school without seeing each other as potential partners. But things changed when we hit adolescence. I started to feel attracted to Paul's comfort and kindness, and I confessed to him. Paul felt the same way, and we started dating. We decided to let our parents know first, and after 6 months of dating, we informed them. However, Sarah was strongly opposed. She never expected us to start dating, and her attitude changed drastically the moment we told her. Since then, she's been very harsh and has viewed me as an enemy.
What did you just say?
Sarah glared at me with eyes full of hatred, as if she were looking at an enemy. Then she suddenly threw the TV remote, which was nearby, directly at my face.
You've got to be kidding me.
What are you doing, Mom?
I have pretty good reflexes, so I managed to dodge the attack. With my hand on my chest in shock, I looked at Sarah, whose eyes were bloodshot. Paul and John widened their eyes and restrained Sarah, who tried to lash out even more. John desperately tried to calm her down, but Sarah wouldn't listen and kept screaming.
I said you've got to be kidding. Dating Rachel. I won't accept it. I won't allow it.
Stop saying nonsense. Calm down.
Paul couldn't help but shout at Sarah's outrageous behavior. John, standing next to her, also shouted at her, but it seemed she didn't hear him. Sarah glared at me with a terrifying expression and spat out curses.
I'm really sorry about how awful Mom was. Lately, it's been getting worse, and even Dad and I can't handle her.
Sarah must be really traumatized by Mary and Emily leaving. After that, Sarah disappeared into her room, saying she didn't want to see my face. John and Paul tried to talk to her, but they were turned away.
It's pathetic. I'm really sorry.
Don't worry about it. Sarah's behavior has a lot to do with Paul's older sister, Mary, and his younger sister, Emily. Sarah has always been prone to hysterics. She has a personality that finds it hard to stay calm, and she would throw tantrums over the smallest things. Because of this, Emily often argued with her, and Mary became exhausted. Both of them ended up despising Sarah. Sarah, being very intelligent herself, wanted to raise Mary and Emily to be just as smart and aimed to get them into prestigious universities. Because of this, she forced them into an intense study regimen, similar to what we now call education-conscious mother. However, for Mary and Emily, this was pure torture.
Mary and Emily were naturally good at sports. They had planned to go to prestigious schools for volleyball and basketball, which they excelled in, but Mom was completely against it. Our house was a battlefield every day with things flying around during their fights.
At that time, the economy was bad, and John's company was on the brink of bankruptcy. As a result, John was overwhelmed with his work and couldn't take care of family matters, leaving Mary and Emily in Sarah's hands.
Mom was at her breaking point due to the dire situation and attempted to take her own life, which forced Mary and Emily to give up on their dreams.
Seeing Sarah leaning over the balcony, Mary and Emily panicked and restrained her. Terrified by Sarah's violent outburst, they had no choice but to abandon their dreams and comply with her demands. Eventually, both of them reached their limit with the situation. Despite Sarah's efforts to stop them, they moved to New York when Paul was in high school. It takes 2 hours by plane to get from their hometown to New York. They thought that being this far away would lessen Sarah's control over them. They rented a room in the same apartment and lived together for a while. Sarah was mentally exhausted by what Mary and Emily had done, and from that point on, she started to depend heavily on Paul. I wonder if I'll feel the same way when I have kids, not wanting to let them go.
I doubt it. It's not just about not wanting to let them go. It's more like a desire to control rather than to possess. She wants to keep us close as her puppets to manipulate.
Paul's eyes darkened. Our house is located directly across the street from Sarah's house. An apartment across from us happened to have a vacancy, and I suggested to Paul that moving there might make Sarah feel more at ease. Paul was against the idea, but I approached Sarah. I believed that eventually she would have to accept it, so I stood firm in my decision. Mary and Emily still showed no signs of returning home. In fact, to distance themselves further from Sarah, they have now moved to a location that is a 2-hour flight from New York. They informed us that they are living comfortably away from Sarah.
Sometimes I wonder, would it be better for you if you were with another man? I worry that by dragging you into this complicated family situation, I'm making you unhappy. I'm really sorry.
Every time Paul apologized, I would cheer him up with a bright smile that could dispel the gloom. I knew what I was getting into when I chose to be with you, so instead of feeling down, let's think about how to win Sarah over. It's better to look forward than to dwell on the past.
Rachel, you're really amazing.
For me, this situation is like a game to conquer. How can I get stubborn Sarah to accept us? If I secure support from those around her and create a situation where she has no choice but to acknowledge us, maybe she'll give in. How can I win her over? For someone like me, who believes in making the best of tough situations, this wasn't something Paul needed to apologize for. However, Paul was suffering more than I was. Sarah's hostility towards him intensified in my absence, and his mental strain caused him to lose a lot of weight. Realizing that things couldn't go on like this, I decided to consult with Mary and Emily, who had been friends with me since childhood. As soon as they heard about the situation, both Mary and Emily made time in their schedules and flew over to see me. Emily listened to the detailed story with her mouth agape, while Mary expressed her anger openly.
Mom did that.
That's insane. It's embarrassing to think that such a person is our mom.
At this point, Emily was working as a paralegal, and Mary was a budding nail technician. Despite their busy schedules, they made time to discuss what we should do next.
What did Dad say? Did he mention anything?
Two of them, whom I hadn't seen in a while, looked more mature and somewhat sophisticated. Having left home and found themselves, they seemed vibrant and full of life. Sarah was so agitated that we sent her back home yesterday. John apologized profusely before leaving, but he didn't say anything specific about Sarah.
I can't believe she started treating you like that, too. It's unforgivable.
Mom's always had a tendency to overreact. I figured she'd be upset when she heard about your relationship. but I didn't think it would get this bad.
I'm going to tell her off and ask her what she's thinking, acting like this at her age.
Emily had a much worse relationship with Sarah than Mary did, especially when it came to her career path. The reason was that Sarah was the only one who opposed Emily's dream of becoming a lawyer. Even though Emily tried to fulfill Sarah's wish by graduating from a prestigious university and pursuing a career in law, Sarah kept opposing it, saying Emily would never make it.
I snapped when she mocked me, saying, "You're just a money waster." So I ran away and sought refuge at Mary's place.
When I asked Emily why she had run away back then, she told the story casually. Emily has always had an optimistic outlook, while Mary likes to plan things meticulously and act accordingly. It's probably because they are so different that they enjoy being together. I was relieved to see that Mary and Emily were still getting along well after moving to New York. I expressed my gratitude to Emily for her offer. "Thank you. I appreciate it, but I'll try talking to Sarah myself again. These things need to be faced directly. We're going to be family and support each other, so I can't run away."
Rachel, you're amazing. You make me feel inadequate.
Emily's just too emotional about it. But seriously, if anything comes up, talk to us, okay? We're here to help.
After expressing my gratitude for their concern, I told them I would try talking to Sarah again the next day. They stayed at my parents' house for a few days. They spent a pleasant time with my parents, enjoying each other's company after a long while. The next day, I reported back to Sarah. But the result was the same. She was completely against it. In fact, she had an even worse hysterical outburst than before, leaving me at a loss. When Mary and Emily heard what happened, they rushed over and intervened. Thanks to their help, Sarah finally agreed to our relationship. Apparently, their logical persuasion left her with no arguments. We managed to get married after that, but that's when the real nightmare began.
Can't you even do this? When I got married, I handled these tasks perfectly.
Sarah insisted that we live together as a condition for our marriage. She likely wanted to harass me until we divorced. However, I was used to Sarah's abuse, and I had developed my tolerance. So instead of being intimidated by her harassment, I responded cheerfully and positively. "Wow, that's amazing. You really are incredible, Sarah. I'm so glad you can handle this because I definitely can't." Sarah only intended to demonstrate and criticize, but her face turned bright red when she realized I was cleverly using her efforts, and she started screaming complaints in a shrill voice. But I wasn't bothered by her tantrums. I let her words go in one ear and out the other and continued cleaning while humming a tune. Both Paul and John were stunned as they watched. They hadn't expected me to handle things with such composure. I thought our married life would be okay. Some time passed, and then one day it happened. My dad suddenly passed away. The cause was heart failure. On the morning he died, my mom called me, and I was in a state of shock. Even I was mentally devastated and didn't have the courage to go see my dad one last time. However, Paul, worried about me, accompanied me, and thanks to him, I managed to go on the day of the funeral. When I called Sarah and John to inform them of my dad's sudden passing, John, who took the call, agreed and understood. He said he would inform Sarah as well, sparing me the trouble of having to tell her myself. His funeral was held at a funeral home where one of my dad's acquaintances worked. Wanting to give him a grand send-off, many people came, and tears welled up in my eyes from the overwhelming emotion. It was during my dad's funeral that an incident occurred.
Our family's gathering is important. If you don't come back, I'll force you to get a divorce.
On the morning of the funeral, just 3 hours before the service, Paul received a call informing him that a relative on his side of the family had also passed away. The person was a distant relative of Paul's, and when Paul contacted John, he was told that it would be enough for John to attend and that we didn't need to go. However, when we arrived at the funeral home, Sarah, who had arrived before us, greeted us with fury.
How dare you not prioritize your husband's family?
Sarah scolded me for an incomprehensible reason.
Why are you trying to attend your family funeral when one of our relatives has died? It's normal for a wife to prioritize her husband's family.
What nonsense are you talking about? Even if it's just me, Rachel is different. Robert has passed away. Don't say such ridiculous things on a day like this.
Since our marriage, Paul has constantly stood up to Sarah on my behalf. He has protested against her attitude, her language, and her treatment of me. Paul couldn't tolerate Sarah's inhumane behavior and kept trying to make her understand. However, it seems he had reached his limit. Even in front of all these people, Sarah was spouting incomprehensible logic, and Paul was fed up. Paul's desperate hope that she wouldn't say anything more embarrassing was unmistakably clear.
So what if he died? He was a lousy father who raised such a useless daughter. It's not like we need to attend. Just get ready quickly. Let one of his brothers be the chief mourner instead.
What? Are you kidding me? Hey, Mom. Wait a minute.
However, Sarah didn't understand Paul's feelings and continued to make outrageous statements, causing Paul to become furious. Just as he grabbed her arm to stop her, my anger reached its peak, and I slapped her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the funeral home lobby.
What do you think you're doing?
Sarah staggered back, shocked by the sudden slap. Paul was stunned to see her like that. Immediately, people started rushing over to find out what had happened, and the situation escalated. Sarah held her cheek, both in pain and surprise, glaring at me. I finally unleashed all the anger I had been holding back. It's not, what do you think you're doing? You were saying ridiculous things, so I had to set you straight.
What?
Sarah looked as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Tears of shock and pain welled up in her eyes, and people around us started asking what had happened. However, I ignored the voices around me and knelt down to meet Sarah's gaze as she lay on the ground. It's one thing to insult me, but what did you just say? Seeing the furious expression on my face, Sarah trembled with fear. She couldn't answer my question, too scared to speak. I repeated my question in an even deeper, more threatening voice. I asked you, what did you say about my dad? Sarah's shock was evident as she looked at me. Until now, I had never shown any defiance towards her. There was a reason for that. If I lost my temper like this, no one could handle it. I had always responded cheerfully and positively, out of gratitude to Paul, but mocking my dad was a different matter. I glared at Sarah with intense fury. My dad never treated his children as possessions. He was a good man who listened to his children's opinions. And you call him a lousy father? Don't make me laugh. Though I spoke with mocking tones, Sarah said nothing. No, she couldn't say anything. Her hands were trembling with fear, and she was backing away from me as if trying to escape. If my dad is a lousy dad, then what are you? A toxic parent?
What? Who are you calling toxic parent? Don't be so rude.
In high school, I clashed with my dad once during my rebellious phase. I was on the tennis team and was undefeated in middle school, with no rivals in sight. However, when I became a sophomore, a freshman who had national experience joined our team. After my first painful loss, I became withdrawn and stopped going to school. My dad wouldn't allow this, and we argued repeatedly about me going back to school. When I finally told him why I didn't want to go, he laughed it off with a bright smile.
It just shows how much you love tennis. That's wonderful. Until you're ready, live your life as you see fit. I can't stand people who run away without giving a reason. Running away isn't something to be ashamed of. If you're feeling down, then feel down all the way. Just be honest with us about how you feel. If you do that, your mom and I will always protect you from anyone who mocks you. Don't forget, we're always on your side.
He said this while roughly patting my head. At that moment, I deeply thought, I'm so glad he's my dad. I'm proud to be their daughter. There are no better parents than mine. Since then, I've respected my dad. Being ridiculed about my wonderful dad made it impossible to stay calm. Then you shouldn't call someone else's beloved father lousy. At the very least, my dad was far more respectable than you. He never tried to control his children or treat them like his possessions. I completely lost my temper and started yelling at Sarah, not caring who was watching. Hearing the commotion, the venue staff rushed over. Other relatives also gathered, asking what was going on. Sarah, holding her cheek, began to scream that she was the victim.
How barbaric, slapping someone suddenly and yelling at them in public. You're the worst. What kind of upbringing did you have?
Some of the relatives, who didn't know the full story, took Sarah's words at face value and started whispering among themselves. I tried desperately to clear up the misunderstanding, but Sarah started crying loudly, and everyone was concerned about her. She had completely outmaneuvered me. Through her hair, she gave me a sly look, mocking me. If this continues, Sarah will get exactly what she wants, and I'll be seen as the bad guy. Paul tried to explain the situation, but everyone was too focused on the sobbing Sarah to listen properly. Just 3 hours earlier, I never would have imagined we'd be in this mess. Who could have thought that 3 hours later, we'd be in this kind of chaos? As I was wondering what to do, it happened.
If anyone needs to answer about their upbringing, it's you, making a spectacle of yourself like this.
To my surprise, John, who was supposed to be with the other relatives, suddenly appeared. Neither Paul nor I expected John to come, so we were both surprised. But no one was more shocked than Sarah. Her eyes widened in surprise.
I just came to check things out and then planned to come back on the day of the funeral. Then I got a call from Mary saying you were causing a scene at the venue, so I rushed back.
Behind John, Mary and Emily were smiling broadly at me. Mary and Emily were also familiar with my dad. I later learned that Mary and Emily, who had been fed up with Sarah since they were young, often visited our house and stayed over long before I could even remember.
Whenever we said we didn't want to go home, Robert always let us stay over. Dad felt safe knowing we were at Robert's place and gave us permission to stay.
He was like a second dad to us, teaching us volleyball and basketball.
They would say this with a smile and often shared fond memories of my dad with me. This was my dad's funeral. Mary and Emily were also attending the funeral and happened to witness the entire exchange. Mary immediately contacted John. Emily recorded the entire incident with a video camera to capture evidence. They exposed Sarah's lies, proving that I hadn't done anything wrong.
Now it's proven that Rachel didn't do anything wrong.
Everyone was shocked by the video evidence playing, and they confronted Sarah, demanding an explanation. Realizing she was in a precarious position, Sarah panicked. Shouts of anger erupted from all around her.
If you're going to insult Robert, we won't stand for it.
Do you know how many people he helped?
Disrespecting the deceased is unforgivable. If you're going to talk like that, leave. It's disgusting to have someone like you here.
The crowd's anger quickly turned towards Sarah. Faced with the onslaught of insults, Sarah's anger also reached its peak. Ignoring John's presence, she began yelling back at the attendees.
What? Like mother, like daughter, right? How can you talk to people like that? Paul, you should cut ties with this woman right away. If you divorce her now, you can still come home.
You're right. I should get a divorce from this terrible woman.
What? Everyone was stunned by John's unexpected agreement with Sarah's outburst, and they all turned their surprised gazes towards him.
That's right. You finally understand how I feel. Divorcing this woman is the best thing for Paul.
Thinking John was on her side, Sarah rushed over to him, clinging to his arm with shining eyes. Seeing Sarah and John like that, I felt despair. Divorce. John, why? I've been betrayed by John too. Then, John thrust a piece of paper towards Sarah.
It's disgraceful to have someone like you in my family. I don't want to be known as the husband of someone so shameful. Sign this now. We're done today.
It was a completed divorce form, already signed by John. John.
John, why?
Realizing that John hadn't betrayed us and was actually on our side, both Paul and I brightened up immediately. In contrast, Sarah was stunned by the sudden turn of events, struggling to comprehend what was happening.
I overlooked things because Rachel was managing to deal with you. Honestly, I planned to kick you out of the house much earlier.
What are you talking about?
John had known about Sarah's mistreatment of me since shortly after our marriage. To John, I was like his own daughter. After all, I was the beloved wife of Paul, the daughter he had promised his best friend to take care of. He considered me part of his family. John couldn't forgive Sarah for treating me poorly and had even consulted me about divorcing her. He told me that if I agreed, he would get rid of Sarah.
But it was Rachel who stopped me from doing that.
In truth, I wanted to agree with John's proposal. However, I knew that Sarah's tight hold on Paul was because she cared deeply about him. Her feelings for Paul weren't entirely bad. I didn't mind putting up with her insults, so there was no need for a divorce. Just knowing that John was willing to support me in that way was enough, so I stopped him from going through with his divorce.
Yet you trampled on Rachel's kindness and even went so far as to insult her parents. I've had enough. I don't want to see your face anymore.
How could this be?
Sarah had likely let her guard down, thinking she wouldn't be divorced despite her behavior. Sarah showed a look of panic in response to John's testimony. No one was concerned about Sarah's distress. Instead, they praised John.
So, sign this. We don't need someone like you in our family.
No way.
What?
Everyone thought this was the end for Sarah. However, she hung her head and unexpectedly refused. Then she suddenly lifted her head, wearing a crazed smile, and started provoking us.
Who do you think you are, making me sign this? I will never agree to a divorce. I won't accept such a reason for a divorce.
You.
John's face contorted with anger as Sarah continued to mock him. Sarah continued to provoke John's emotions even further.
Too bad. I have no intention of divorcing, and you don't have enough grounds for a divorce, so you can't even take me to court. Since you can't divorce me, you'll have to keep supporting me.
Completely confident in her victory, Sarah laughed triumphantly, taunting John. However, Emily, with a big smile, stepped forward.
You can get divorced, you know?
What?
Emily, now in professional mode, appeared with glasses on and spoke surprising words.
I said Dad can get divorced.
What are you talking about?
It seems you think a divorce is difficult, but take a look at this.
Emily handed over a very thick brown envelope. Sarah nervously checked the contents. As Sarah's face turned pale, she looked at John in fear and collapsed to the floor. Everyone around exchanged looks and then turned their gaze to Emily, seeking an explanation. She adjusted her glasses with her index finger and smiled as she cornered Sarah.
The man in this picture, do you recognize him?
No, this is.
Oh, you don't recognize him? Well, let's show everyone else.
Stop it.
Emily snatched the documents from Sarah, raising them high for all to see. Sarah reached out to grab it, but Emily, standing at an impressive 5 feet 7 inches, was too tall for her. On the other hand, Sarah was very short at only 4 feet 9 inches. As a result, Sarah couldn't even reach Emily's wrist, her hands swiping through the air futilely. As everyone watched the two of them, their eyes fell on the documents. Seeing the person pictured, gasps of surprise echoed around the room.
Hey, is that?
The person in the picture is.
The man in the picture was none other than Robert's brother, Matthew, my uncle. As soon as everyone recognized him, all eyes turned towards Matthew. His face drained of color and he looked panicked, realizing the situation he was in. Matthew despised my dad. My dad was an exceptional person, while Matthew felt he never received any recognition. Emily had found out that Matthew often complained that everything would be better if my dad wasn't around. It was Sarah who approached Matthew. Sarah couldn't stand how close John and my dad were. She wanted to be number one in John's life so badly that she became jealous of his friend and let it fester. Matthew, aware of this, became intrigued by Sarah. The two eventually developed an affair.
Getting involved with your husband's best friend's brother? You're quite the shameless woman. Just hearing about it makes me sick.
Even in professional mode, Emily's true feelings were evident. Hearing this, I glared at Sarah, filled with anger and resentment. You lecture me about propriety as a daughter-in-law, yet what is this behavior? How dare you get involved with a relative and talk about propriety? Don't make me laugh.
Shut up. It's all your fault.
What? I couldn't believe her audacity as she glared back at me. Then, in a fit of rage, Sarah stood up, pointed at me, and began hurling unreasonable accusations.
If you hadn't married into this family, I wouldn't have become such a terrible person. None of this would have been exposed, and I could have continued living peacefully. You ruined everything.
Enough already.
Just as I was about to retaliate against Sarah's unjust accusations, Paul, who had been silent until now, stepped in between us and snapped at Sarah.
Rachel has done nothing wrong. In fact, neither my dad, Robert, nor anyone else is at fault. The only ones to blame are you and Matthew.
Paul pointed at Matthew, his stern gaze fixed on Sarah.
Do you have any idea how much our family has suffered every time you threw one of your hysterical fits? We're all fed up with you. We're overjoyed that Dad finally mentioned a divorce. We've wanted you out of the house for a long time.
What? How can you say that to your own mother?
Don't start pretending to be a decent mom now.
Sarah's face twisted with anger as she listened to Paul's heartfelt outburst. Then Mary stepped in, her voice filled with rage.
I never once felt like you raised us properly. You have no idea how much we, your children, have suffered because of you.
Mary, usually calm and collected, spoke with uncharacteristic fury.
It was Dad and Robert who taught us about life's hardships and joys, not you. We have no memories of being genuinely loved by you. And now you want to act like a mother? Don't make me laugh. You have no right to insult Robert. If you keep hurting Rachel, I won't forgive you.
How dare you?
Mary's words, so satisfying to hear, lifted my spirits. Before Sarah could retort, my relatives began applauding Mary's speech. In no time, Sarah found herself isolated. Even Matthew abandoned her and fled the scene.
So, we're getting divorced. If you want to fight, bring it on. I have the funds to take this all the way.
No, wait, please, don't abandon me.
Realizing that John's mind was made up, Sarah clung to him, begging for forgiveness through her tears. However, John easily pushed her away. Then Sarah turned to me, desperately pleading.
Please, Rachel, stop John. I won't harass you anymore. From now on, let's live together in harmony and support each other. I've always really liked you, honestly, so please.
Sarah tried to cover her lies. She would say anything to avoid getting divorced from John. Seeing through her transparent motives filled me with disgust. Seeing how convenient her words were, I pushed her away with a bright smile. No thanks. I have absolutely no interest in building a good relationship with you.
Rachel?
She must have had the naive idea that an apology would be enough to get my forgiveness. I coldly spoke to Sarah, who had a look of shock on her face. Just your presence here is unpleasant. So could you please leave? I will never forgive you for what you said about my dad or for all the harassment. Don't blame anyone but yourself for being abandoned by John. Everything that has happened is because of your terrible behavior. Sarah, enraged by my words, reached out to grab me. But John and Paul restrained her. John called over a friend, and together they escorted Sarah out of the funeral home. In this way, I finally succeeded in settling my long-standing grievances. After that, Sarah and John divorced. Despite Sarah's staunch refusal to divorce until the very end, the evidence Emily gathered and the revelation of her affair at the funeral sealed the deal, and John successfully finalized the divorce. Taking advantage of John's divorce, Paul reported Sarah to the police. After the divorce, Sarah, having been kicked out of the house, repeatedly came back trying to visit. As a result, a restraining order was issued against her under the anti-stalking law. Sarah also visited Mary and Emily, but they all responded in the same way. Eventually, Sarah faced legal consequences. John also sued Matthew for compensation. Matthew made the pitiful excuse that Sarah had led him astray, but John wasn't having it and demanded financial compensation. Since then, we've enjoyed peaceful days. Paul and I had a child, and Mary and Emily also got married and had children.
Isn't it amazing that we all had children in the same year? It's amazing.
It's quite the coincidence, isn't it?
I'm just glad. Having both of you back here to raise your children is such a blessing. Mary and Emily returned home during their pregnancies and now live here with their families. While I was thrilled to have them back, no one was happier than John. He apologized for the hardships they endured while he was busy with his work. Mary and Emily in unison said, "If you help with your grandchildren, all is forgiven," and smiles finally returned to everyone's faces.
It's all thanks to you, Rachel, because you never gave up and stayed with us.
As I looked at Paul's happy smile, I savored my own happiness as well.